In the late 80s and early 90s, European guards weren't respected. They were called soft, unathletic, too fragile for the NBA. Scouts didn't just doubt them, they dismissed them. Sarunas Marciulionis was one of the first European guards to make it to the league. Tough, skilled, respected, but not quite a star. Then came a kid from a small town in Yugoslavia. No hype, no freakish athletic gifts, just an unshakable fire and an obsession to prove he belonged. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't fast, but he was fearless. Not even Michael Jordan could intimidate him. Before he ever set foot in the NBA, he dropped 112 points in a single game in Europe, a performance so outrageous it sounded made up, but it was real.
An early sign that he was headed for greatness. He scored, now get this, 112 points in one game.
And it wasn't just a case of chucking up shots all night. He was efficient, hitting 40 of 60 from the field and 10 of 20 from three. This was long before the three-point shot became the weapon it is today. But he already had it in his arsenal. He wasn't just dominant, he was ahead of his time. His motto?
I shoot too when you can step back and take three.
He could have stayed in Europe, lived comfortably, dominated the game, and been celebrated as the best player on the continent. But that wasn't enough. He needed a new challenge, as he once said, "If I don't try the NBA, I will hurt for the rest of my life." And once he got there, he didn't hesitate. He went right at legends, and never backed down. He went at Michael Jordan, arguably the greatest basketball player of all time.
Jordan, like, yo, it ain't nothing. Like, give me the ball, I'm hot. I'm taking him.
He was the only member of the Croatian national team who truly believed they had a chance against the Dream Team.
And that was, I thought Dražen Petrović was the one unique person that felt he had a chance and played like it. And, he was the one guy that stood out.
He pointed a finger at Reggie Miller after drilling a jumper in his face. Vernon Maxwell even said he'd rather guard Jordan than deal with Dražen Petrović.
I'm trying to tell you, that motherfucker give me nightmares. I'd rather guard motherfucking Black Jesus, Michael Jordan,
really,
than guard that motherfucker. That's how bad it was for me and that motherfucker. This motherfucker used to give me buckets.
He talked trash, and he had the game to back it up. Michael Jordan said, "It was a thrill to play against Drazen. He wasn't nervous. He came at me as hard as I came at him." Reggie Miller said it himself.
People talk about Steph's release being so quick.
Yeah.
Well, Petrovic had the quickest release I've ever seen.
Celtics great Danny Ainge compared him to the legendary Pete Maravich.
Petrovic is a very exciting player. I would compare him to kind of a Pistol Pete.
And Larry Bird added,
I don't think anybody can shut him down. He's a very, very talented player.
Chuck Daly, coach of the Dream Team, once reflected,
he would have been a phenomenal player in the league for years and years.
And David Stern called him a true pioneer, someone who paved the way for international players to succeed in the NBA. They called him the Mozart of basketball, not just for his creativity, but for the rhythm, precision, and relentless practice behind every move. Because for Drazen, this wasn't just about basketball. While his homeland was being torn apart by war, he carried the pride of a nation on his back, determined to prove he belonged in the best basketball league in the world, shot by shot, game by game. He forced the NBA to respect European guards. He wasn't just another international player. He was the first true European star in the NBA. Before Luka, before Manu, before Giannis, before Dirk. Before Tony Parker ever held a Finals MVP. There was Dražen Petrović, the NBA underdog who didn't fear legends, the fearless baller who changed everything. But before he went toe-to-toe with legends, before the bright lights, the headlines, and the Hall of Fame, there was a kid in Šibenik, Yugoslavia, grinding in silence. This is where the story begins.
He was the Michael Jordan of Europe. He was the best player over there.
Before he faced Jordan, before the NBA knew his name, Dražen Petrović was just a skinny kid from the seaside town of Šibenik, Yugoslavia. He was born into a working-class family. His father, Jovan, was a police officer. His mother, Biserka, a librarian. But his biggest influence wasn't at home. It was his older brother, Aleksandar. A rising basketball talent himself, Alexander became Dražen's role model. From a young age, Dražen followed him everywhere, dribbling behind him, copying his moves, always trying to catch up to his shadow. By age 10, he already had Adrian Dantley's hips, and the dexterity of a mini Magic, one writer noted. But something was noticeably missing. "You shoot like Fred Flintstone," Alexander teased. "Your shots break stones." That stung, but it lit a fire. Dražen promised himself that one day nobody would ever doubt his shot again. By 13, Drazen had joined the youth team of KK Šibenka, but he didn't want to dominate his age group. He wanted more. He actively sought out older competition, often begging coaches to let him train and scrimmage with the senior squad. While most teenagers were content to shine against peers, Drazen believed the only way to improve was to test himself against grown men. He wanted the hits, he wanted the challenge, and by 15, he was doing exactly that, competing in the Yugoslav First Division, one of the toughest pro leagues in Europe. He didn't have elite speed, he wasn't blessed with freakish athleticism, but he had something far more dangerous: obsession. He trained relentlessly, 6 to 8 hours a day, every day. With his mother's help, Dražen got a key to the school gym. He'd arrive at 6 a.m., set up chairs for dribbling drills, and get up 500 shots before class. After school, he'd return to the gym, sometimes staying late into the night. Between morning sessions, team practices, and late-night shooting, he was logging 7 hours a day working on his game. His coaches didn't need to push him. They had to beg him to stop. As coach Neven Spahia recalled, coaches said, "You practice too much, why don't you do something else?" But Dražen never wavered. "I love this," he said. "This is my life, like breathing." As his game sharpened, so did his fire. By 18, Petrovic had polished himself into a star. Games between his Šibenka squad and Alexander's Cibona Zagreb were bruising, sometimes even bloody. A soft-spoken mama's boy off the court, Dražen turned into a ruthless trash talker on it. He'd announce the move he was about to make, and then drive right past his brother. Cibona, the league's premier team, usually won, but more often than not, Dražen outplayed Alexander. When their mother asked him to ease up, Dražen snapped, "If you can't take it, don't come to the games." That edge never left him. At 18, he led Šibenka to what should have been the pinnacle of his young career, a Yugoslav championship sealed by 2 clutch free throws with no time left on the clock. But the celebration was short-lived. The next day, the league stripped the title, citing officiating irregularities. They ruled the final foul a mistake. Drazen didn't pout, he didn't protest, he just went back to the gym. Meanwhile, the country around him was beginning to fracture. Yugoslavia teetered on the edge of collapse. Tensions between republics were rising, civil unrest was building, and war loomed on the horizon. While other teenagers worried about exams or stats, Drazen prepared to carry the weight of a nation. For him, basketball was never just a game. It was an escape, a mission, a way to prove that a kid from a war-torn corner of Europe could rise to the top of the basketball world. He didn't want to just play, he wanted to master the game, and he was willing to sacrifice everything to do it. As former Nets assistant coach Rick Carlisle once said, Drazen had a unique sense of history, and he had studied the NBA game. He knew the history of the NBA, and he also knew that he was breaking ground for future European players. He was not only here to play basketball and pick up a check, he was here to break ground and to become the first European player to have real big NBA success. Drazen knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't just chasing greatness, he was building a legacy. By the time Dražen Petrović left Šibenka, he had already proven he could dominate grown men. But before he could take the next step in his basketball journey, there was one more duty to fulfill: military service. Like all young men in Yugoslavia, Drazen was required to serve for 1 year. When he returned, he didn't go back to Šibenka. Instead, he made a bold move. He joined Cibona Zagreb, the league's premier club, and his brother Alexander's team. That decision marked the beginning of Drazen's absolute dominance. Playing alongside his brother, he helped Cibona capture both the Yugoslav League Championship and the National Cup in his first season. But the true highlight came on the biggest stage, the European Cup final. Drazen dropped 36 points, leading Cibona to its first EuroLeague championship. And he wasn't done. Over the next 2 seasons, Drazen would add 2 more European Cup titles, establishing himself as not just the best player in Yugoslavia, but the best player in all of Europe. His numbers were absurd. Drazen's stretch in Europe was otherworldly. Some of his most ridiculous stat lines included 62 points in a single game, 51 points and 10 assists, 47 points and 25 assists, and an utterly unbelievable 112-point performance. By this point, it was obvious. Drazen had outgrown the Croatian league. He was ready for a bigger stage. Meanwhile, his name was catching fire in America too. In 1980, Notre Dame coach Digger Phelps discovered a then 16-year-old Drazen at a coaching clinic and immediately tried to recruit him. After watching him casually drain deep threes, Years before the NCAA even adopted the shot, Phelps was blown away. "This kid starts shooting threes like wow," Phelps recalled. What followed was a full-scale recruitment push. Phelps offered a full scholarship to Notre Dame, visited Drazen's family in Šibenik, and told him, "If you come here, you'll play in the NBA." There were even reports that Drazen had signed, but the deal never happened. His mother, Biserka, was deeply protective, hesitant to let her son move across the world at such a young age. But the bigger obstacle was political. Yugoslav basketball authorities, and the government were unwilling to let their crown jewel walk away. There was a real fear he would forfeit his Olympic eligibility if he left to play in the West, especially with how closely state institutions managed top athletes. At the time, Olympic basketball was still for amateurs, and even though NCAA players qualified, defecting to the West, especially to the US, raised alarms. The Yugoslav Federation needed him for national pride. Letting him go wasn't an option. Rumors swirled that Cibona coach Mirko Novosel threatened to cut Aleksandar from the team if Drazen accepted the offer. Some even joked that Digger Phelps was painted as a CIA agent to scare off the family. In the end, Dražen stayed. He chose to study law at the University of Zagreb and play with his brother at Cibona. Still, the what-if lingers. What if the kid, some compared to Pistol Pete, had taken his talents to South Bend? What if he had teamed up with future NBA first-round pick David Rivers at Notre Dame, as Phelps envisioned? But Drazen wasn't one for what-ifs. His focus was the next game, the next challenge. And in Europe, there were few left. In 1986, the Portland Trail Blazers drafted Dražen in the 3rd round, but he wasn't ready to cross the Atlantic just yet. Instead, he signed a lucrative contract with Real Madrid, one of Europe's top clubs. His time in Spain was short, but spectacular. In just one season, Drazen led Madrid to 2 championships, including a 62-point explosion that became an instant legend. His transition to a new team, a new league, and a new country had no effect on his brilliance. By 1989, he was ready. And rather than wait for Real Madrid to release him or depend on Portland to negotiate a buyout, Drazen did something almost unheard of at the time. He paid for his own freedom. He reportedly bought himself out of his contract for $1.5 million, using his own money just to chase the dream he'd waited years for. It was a bold move, a risky move, but that was Dražen. Dražen Petrović didn't come to the NBA to ride the bench, but that's exactly what happened. When he arrived in Portland in 1989, the Trailblazers already had an established backcourt. Clyde Drexler, an all-star, and Terry Porter, a rising star. Drazen, despite his European resume and legendary scoring feats, was seen as unproven. Foreign players weren't respected like they are today. Back then, the stereotype was simple. Soft, unathletic system guys who couldn't handle the NBA's physicality. But the doubts ran deeper than that. This was the late 80s. There had never been a player like Dražen Petrović. He was a foreign star, forged outside the traditional American pipeline of AAU and NCAA basketball. No one quite knew what to do with him. He was the Mozart of basketball, but to NBA coaches, that mostly meant an offensive genius with a suspect defensive motor. When Drazen arrived in Portland, he told reporters he wasn't coming to be a role player. He came to challenge himself, to prove he could play against the best in the world, to be the equivalent of a franchise player. But even before that, back in 1986, Drazen wasn't quite ready to make the leap. He stayed in Europe to compete with the Yugoslavian national team, which was aiming for a medal at the 1988 Olympics, a competition that still banned NBA players. But that fall, the national team returned to the US for a series of exhibition games, and it became clear why NBA teams like Portland were so interested. After Drazen dropped 35 points against North Carolina, Coach Dean Smith told the Daily Tar Heel, "He's certainly one of the fine guards in the world." Kentucky coach Eddie Sutton added, "One of the greatest players I've ever seen," after watching him score 32. Arizona coach Lute Olson echoed the sentiment. Petrovic is as fine a guard as there is anywhere. Still, there were skeptics. Mike D'Antoni, who had played against Drazen in Europe, held him to an off night and openly wondered how he'd fare against NBA defenders. Even Digger Phelps, who once desperately tried to recruit Dražen to Notre Dame, now said, "You can't come directly from Europe and think you can be an NBA guard." Some called his defensive effort matador. Others were put off by his John McEnroe-like temperament, or his awkward-looking Lawrence Welk move, a drawn-out 3-step rhythm he used to attack off the dribble. There were real questions. Was he too slow? Too emotional? Too foreign? And yet, What the doubters missed was this. Yes, European players would have to adjust to the NBA, but the league would also have to adapt to them. Still, Drazen entered Portland with the odds stacked against him. He barely played. In his rookie season, he averaged just 12.6 minutes per game. He'd spend most nights watching from the sidelines. And when he did check in, it was usually garbage time. He wasn't used to this. This was a guy who once dropped 112 points in a pro game. Now he was a third-string guard struggling to get the touches. But just because he wasn't playing didn't mean he wasn't competing. After Danny Ainge was traded to Portland in 1990, he and Dražen became close. And they'd challenge each other after every practice. The stakes, lunch, the rules, 53s each, all on the move, curling off imaginary screens in game-like rhythm. I might win 3 out of 12 times, Ainge admitted. If I didn't make 44 or 45 out of 50, I'd have no chance. Even behind the scenes, Drazen was terrifying. He wasn't just a shooter, he was a machine. But no matter how many threes he drained in practice, it didn't translate to trust on the game night. That was the cruel irony. Drazen was out-shooting NBA veterans in the gym. But Portland's coaches didn't trust him in real minutes, especially on the defensive end. And to be fair, they weren't entirely wrong. Drazen was stubborn. He often joked that he was such a good shooter, he didn't need to play defense. Years later, when Terry Porter and coach Igor Kokoshkov worked together in Detroit, they'd still laugh about it. Terry used to say, "We had to tell that expletive to start playing defense," Kokoshkov recalled, chuckling. "I told Terry he didn't have to play defense," he added. His offense was the best defense, but not everyone was amused. Even after Drazen was traded, the same habits followed him. "He didn't give us about defense," laughed Rich Delatry. Then the Nets' strength coach. "You might as well have had a traffic cone out there. At least someone might have tripped over the cone." For 2 years, Drazen languished on the bench, a victim of circumstance, his own matador defense, and Rick Adelman's reluctance to embrace European talent. This was long before Adelman would become a pioneer of Euro-style ball with the Kings. And behind the scenes, Drazen was quietly falling apart. He'd call and say he was being paid $1 million for the best seat in the house, recalled his friend and fellow Croatian, Dino Radja. He was hurting, but he had too much pride to come home. Things reached a breaking point on November 14th, 1990, early in Drazen's second season. By then, he had dropped to 4th on the depth chart, behind Drexler, Porter, and newly acquired Danny Ainge. In Portland's first 6 games, Drazen played a total of just 11 minutes. After logging just 2 minutes in a blowout win over Denver, he finally snapped. "I want to be traded," he told the Oregonian. "I'm the 12th man on the roster, and I don't deserve that. I'm not being treated fairly." Then he issued an ultimatum. "If nothing is done by November 30th, I'm going back to Yugoslavia." The frustration was understandable. The season before, as a rookie, he averaged 7.6 points in 77 games, and had begun to build a following with his flashy, fearless play. But Ainge's arrival pushed him out of Adelman's already crowded rotation. Drazen tried to stay patient, but patience wore thin. Coach Rick Adelman, while empathetic, didn't budge. "Let's be realistic," he said. "Here's a guy who averaged 7 points a game last year. This is not an all-star player. We have a lot of guys playing ahead of him who are very good players. He's making awfully good money to play this game." The Blazers didn't trade Drazen by November 30th, but on January 23rd, 1991, they finally granted his wish. Petrovic was traded to the New Jersey Nets in a 3-team deal that sent 6-time All-Star Walter Davis to Portland. Drazen was gone. But now, finally, he was going to get his chance. When Dražen Petrović arrived in New Jersey in January 1991, he wasn't looking for stardom, he was looking for minutes, a chance, a clean slate, and that's exactly what he got. The Nets weren't a powerhouse, but they were rebuilding, and they needed offense. Drazen came off the bench at first, but it didn't take long for him to prove that Portland had made a mistake. His confidence never wavered. He shot with no hesitation, attacked relentlessly, and ignited the offense with his fiery energy. Fans in New Jersey took notice. So did the league. By the start of the 1991-92 season, Drazen was the Nets' starting shooting guard, and he exploded. He averaged 20.6 points per game, shot 51% from the field, and 44% from 3. No longer shackled by DNPs or short stints, Drazen was finally allowed to be Drazen. Flanked by point guard Kenny Anderson and big man Derek Coleman, he found his rhythm, running the floor, stretching defenses, and torching opponents with mid-range pull-ups, off-ball cuts, and rainbow threes.
I mean, if he missed a shot, I mean, you look at the free throw next to each other, I can't believe that,
said Willis Reed, the Nets GM at the time. He was money. Drazen would finish his NBA career shooting 43.7% from three-point range, at the time the third best mark in league history, behind only Steve Kerr and Hubert Davis. In Croatia, that number is sacred. Nearly every young baller knows it by heart. He was one of the first guys to shoot from 3 and 4 feet behind the line, and he was doing it running full speed off screens, said Rick Carlisle. It was absolutely wild. He would be perfectly suited to play today. And it wasn't just his range, it was how quickly he could get it off. Dražen could come off a screen at a 45-degree angle, do a 180, and release his shot quicker than anyone I ever saw, Carlisle added. This wasn't a role player. This wasn't a gimmick. This was a star. And the league knew it. But Drazen's breakout didn't change who he was behind the scenes. Even as his star rose, he maintained the same maniacal work ethic that had defined him since Šibenik. In the summer of 1991, instead of flying home to Croatia like most international players, Drazen stayed in New Jersey to train with Nets strength coach Rich Dalatry. But Dalatry quickly realized Drazen's drive came with a cost. He was killing himself, Dalatry said. It was detrimental. I had to tell him, you are not a marathon runner, you are not in the Tour de France. He had to be told to work less, to replace the endless running and biking with focused skill work. But his obsession didn't stop there. When his knee began to bother him, the team gave him a portable ultrasound therapy device. It was supposed to be used for a few minutes a day. Drazen figured more was better. Much more. He rubbed it on his knee for so long he burned the skin. A self-inflicted injury caused not by carelessness but by overcommitment. That was Drazen. Even pain couldn't outwork him. That summer wasn't just about conditioning. It was about defense. Dalatry pushed Drazen to improve the one area critics used to hold against him. And Drazen showed up every single day. No shortcuts, no complaints. Then one Friday he asked to leave early. No explanation. Just a quiet, confident, I'll be back Monday. Dalatry found out later that Drazen had flown back to war-torn Croatia for barely more than a day just to check on his family. He probably knew I would have told him to stay for a week, Dalatry said. He and Jason Kidd are the best I have ever come across in terms of working. All that sacrifice, all that focus, came together in the 1992-93 season. Drazen averaged 22.3 points per game, shot 45% from 3, and earned all NBA third-team honors. He wasn't just a fan favorite anymore. He was now one of the best guards in the league. The sky was the limit, said Derek Coleman. We had such a good spirit on that team. And the league wasn't just seeing a scorer anymore. Drazen could run the break, drop no-look dimes, and control tempo. George Karl once compared him to Pete Maravich. Flashy, unpredictable, fearless. From mid-range, he was unguardable. Pump fakes, head fakes, jab steps. Defenders didn't know where to lean. Vernon Maxwell, a defensive junkyard dog, once said Drazen was the toughest player he ever guarded, tougher even than Michael Jordan. But it wasn't just the skill, it was the fire. Drazen overflowed with charisma. He pumped his fists, raised both arms like a gladiator. He went toe-to-toe with Jordan, barked at Reggie Miller, and once pointed a finger in Miller's face after draining a shot over him. He goaded Maxwell into technicals with his antics. I think Vernon wanted to fight him once, Kenny Anderson laughed. And believe it or not, this was the restrained version. In Europe, Drazen was a showman. He strutted. He smirked. He played like a pro wrestling heel. I hated his guts as a kid, recalled Kresimir Kovacic, who grew up in Zadar. He'd make faces. He'd do his celebrations. It was awful. He'd come to our city and embarrass us. Even his agent, Warren Ligari, warned him, "You've already got a target on your back. Don't make it harder." But Drazen understood where he was. He respected the NBA and knew how hard it was to survive in it. So he kept the wilder parts in check. But when the lights were bright and the game got chippy, they'd slip out, the glare, the finger point, the snarl after a dagger 3. Drazen wasn't just fitting in, he was owning it. He even improved on defense, silencing the last of the doubters. And he did it all while juggling more than basketball. Back home, Yugoslavia was falling apart. The Civil War frayed relationships, even among teammates. His once close bond with Vlade Divac, a Serbian star, grew tense. There were wounds that ran deeper than the court. But on it, Drazen never slowed down. He just kept climbing. From Benchwarmer in Portland to Cornerstone in New Jersey, he had silenced the doubters. He wasn't just representing Croatia. He was representing an entire continent. And finally, the world was starting to catch up to what Europe had known all along. Drazen wasn't just good, he was great. Long before Luka Doncic, before Giannis, before Dirk, before Pau, there was Drazen. For kids growing up in Croatia, He wasn't just a basketball player. He was the standard. On blacktops across Šibenik, Zagreb, and Split, kids didn't pretend to be Michael Jordan. They wanted to be like Petrovic. He had shown them that it was possible, that a skinny kid from the Adriatic could not only reach the NBA, but earn respect there, not by conforming, but by competing, fighting and outworking everyone. Even as the Yugoslav wars tore the region apart, Drazen helped unify Croatia through basketball. When he stepped on the court for the newly formed Croatian national team in the 1992 Olympics, it was more than a game. It was symbolic, a declaration that Croatia had arrived not just politically but athletically. But they weren't just there to wave the flag, they came to win. While the Dream Team was the overwhelming favorite, with the world's attention locked on Jordan, Magic, and Bird, there were only a few nations seen as serious contenders for a medal. The unified team made up of ex-Soviet republics. Lithuania, led by Arvydas Sabonis and Šarūnas Marčiulionis. And most of all, Croatia. With Drazen leading the way, and flanked by Toni Kukoc, Dino Radja, and Stojko Vrankovic, Croatia had talent, chemistry, and one thing most others lacked, belief. And that belief started with Drazen, the semifinal game against the unified team. A remnant of the former Soviet Union tested that belief. Croatia looked out of sync. Their shots weren't falling. With just 30 seconds left, they trailed by 4. Some fans began to file out, assuming it was over. But Drazen wasn't built to quit. First, Kukoc buried a 3. Down by 1 with just 9 seconds to go, Drazen drove into a swarm of defenders and drew the foul. The arena held its breath. I felt like I held all of Croatia in my hands, he later told his mother. I couldn't miss for the country. He didn't. 2 clutch free throws. Croatia took a 75-74 lead. Then came one final stand. Toni Kukoc smothered Alexander Volkov, forcing an off-balance airball at the buzzer. The moment the game ended, Drazen sprinted into the stands, grabbed a Croatian flag, and broke down in tears. We were all crying, said Dino Radja. You have no idea what this meant to our country. With bombs falling, we were dead, and then we came back from the dead. It was more than a comeback. It was a resurrection, led by Drazen. In an outtake from the Dream Team documentary, John Stockton recalled the attitude of most teams who played the U.S.
Felt sorry for the other teams. Number one, I knew that they knew they had no chance to beat us going in. You could see it in their eyes. You could see them walking on the court. You could see it in their body language, everything. And pretty much that was the approach of every NBA guy that we came across except for one, and that was, I thought Dražen Petrović was the one unique person that felt he had a chance and played like it. And he was the one guy that stood out.
Drazen didn't care who was on the other side, he believed. And for a brief moment in that gold medal game, he made the world believe too. Croatia became the only team in the entire tournament to take a lead against the Dream Team, going up 25-23 before a Charles Barkley 3 flipped it back. The U.S. would go on to win comfortably, but for Croatia, the mission had already been accomplished. A country barely a year old had pushed the greatest basketball team ever assembled, and Drazen had carried them there. That 1992 squad, featuring Toni Kukoc, Dino Radja, and Stojko Vrankovic, became Croatia's basketball golden generation, and Drazen was its heartbeat. He wasn't just the team's best player, he was their example. Off the court, his work ethic became legend. On it, he brought an edge and professionalism that Croatia had never seen before. Today, every Croatian player, from Dario Saric to Bojan Bogdanovic, walks through a door Drazen kicked down. He didn't just inspire them, he made their dreams plausible. By 1993, Dražen Petrović had arrived. He had just finished the best season of his career, averaging 22.3 points per game, shooting 45% from 3, earning All-NBA third-team honors, and leading a young rising Nets team poised to shake up the Eastern Conference. He was just 28, and his best basketball was still ahead of him. That summer, Drazen returned to Europe to help Croatia qualify for the European Championships. On June 6th, he dropped 30 points against Slovenia in a qualifier in Poland. With their tournament berth secured, the team prepared to fly home to Zagreb with a stopover in Frankfurt. As they taxied to the gate in Germany, Drazen did something unexpected. He told teammates that if his girlfriend arrived in time, he'd skip the flight and drive to Munich with her. He had never done that before, recalled teammate Stojko Vrankovic. He would always fly to Zagreb and then go to Šibenik, Sure enough, his girlfriend, Klara Shalanci, arrived just in time. Drazen grabbed his bags and left with her. Later that afternoon, as his teammates flew through turbulent skies, Dino Radja looked out the window. There were black clouds below and blue sky above. He remembered. I looked at my watch. It was 5 o'clock. That was right when the accident happened. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was what was happening hundreds of miles below. It had started as a fine early summer day in Munich, 26 degrees Celsius, skies mostly clear, until a sudden afternoon thunderstorm rolled in without warning. Rain hammered the region, turning the Autobahn slick and treacherous. Klara Shalanci was behind the wheel of her Volkswagen Golf, heading south toward Munich. She and Drazen had made a stop earlier in the trip from Frankfurt. And by then, Drazen, exhausted from travel and little sleep the night before, had decided to nap in the passenger seat. They were traveling at high speed, around 180 kilometers per hour, when it happened. Roughly 15 miles outside of Ingolstadt, a Dutch truck driver heading north was forced to swerve as another car hydroplaned into his lane. The truck veered off course, smashed through the median barrier, and came to a halt, blocking all 3 lanes of southbound traffic. The driver jumped out and desperately waved at oncoming cars, trying to prevent disaster. But it was too late. Shalanci's Golf was coming fast. She saw the truck, gripped the steering wheel, and slammed the brakes, but the car skidded on the wet asphalt, clipped the guardrail, and shot back across the lane. The front right side, the passenger side, smashed directly into the truck. Drazen, still asleep and not wearing a seatbelt, never saw it coming. The violent force of the crash hurled him forward, inflicting catastrophic head trauma. He was killed instantly. The impact spared Klara from the worst. The swerve into the guardrail turned her slightly away from the collision's full force, likely saving her life. She was hospitalized for a week. Their friend Hilal Edebal, riding in the back seat, was thrown into the front, suffering a broken arm, shattered hip, and serious brain injuries. She survived, but barely. Emergency crews rushed to the scene. Diesel fuel flooded the pavement, and the crushed Golf lay crumpled against the truck's cab. The 2 women were rushed to nearby hospitals, Edebal by helicopter. But Drazen was gone. Paramedics tried to revive him, but the damage was irreversible. He was just 28 years old. His gold watch stopped at exactly 5:20 p.m., the moment his life came to an end. Back in Šibenik, Drazen's mother, Biserka, was staying in his apartment when she received the call around 10 p.m. In shock, she ran to the balcony and tried to jump. Her husband, Joel, tackled her just in time and held her as she broke down. "When I heard," said Radja, voice fading, "I was in bed. For a long time I couldn't stand up. For others, grief was compounded by regret. The last year before he died, we just didn't communicate anymore," said Vlade Divac, Dražen's former friend and teammate. "I never had a chance to straighten things out like I did with Tony. I remember the day, the place, the time. I was in Hawaii watching TV with my family, and they showed a picture of Drazen and said he was killed. I couldn't move. In New Jersey, Willis Reed could barely speak his name. He led an NBA delegation to Drazen's funeral, where 500,000 people flooded the streets of Zagreb. Across the world, in Chicago, the NBA paused. A moment of silence was held before Game 1 of the 1993 NBA Finals between the Bulls and Suns. And suddenly, the world understood what it had lost. In death, Dražen Petrović finally received his due, but it wasn't just his country or the league who mourned. The New Jersey Nets had lost their future. With Kenny Anderson, Derek Coleman, and Petrovic, the Nets had built one of the most exciting young trios in the league, coached by Hall of Famer Chuck Daly. They were fast, versatile, and dangerous. They were on the verge of something special. The sky was the limit, Anderson later said. But when Dražen Petrović died, it killed all the dreams for the New Jersey Nets. Chuck Daly didn't come back. They brought in Butch Beard. It just went downhill. From 1992 to 1994, the Nets made 3 straight playoff appearances, but never got past the first round. After Drazen's death, the core fell apart. Coleman went to Philly, Anderson to Charlotte. The team wouldn't return to real relevance until their finals runs nearly a decade later. "It was a new regime," Anderson said. "We had to compete against Jordan and the Bulls. It was just so tough to beat Michael Jordan. Drazen wasn't just the best player on that team, he was its heart, and when that was taken away, everything changed." But his story didn't end in tragedy. Even in death, Drazen's legacy only grew. Everyone remembers where they were when they heard the news. Kresimir Kovacic was asleep in Zagreb. A teammate, Veljko Mršić, knocked on his door. "My wife says I called her crying," he recalled. "But I don't even remember that. I blanked out." Tony Kukoc had just woken up in a Chicago area hospital after tonsil surgery. When he saw Drazen's face on TV, he assumed it was about a contract dispute. Then, he turned up the volume. "We were supposed to play 4 or 5 more years together," Kukoc said. They had roomed together during the 1990 World Championship, often staying up late, planning how they'd play off each other. "Sometimes I still dream about facing him in a Bulls Nets game," Kukoc added. Knowing Drazen, he would have loved to kick my butt and compete with Michael and Scotty. Many close to him still believe he never would have left the NBA. In 2002, 9 years after his death, the Hall of Fame made it official. Dražen Petrović was inducted into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame. Willis Reed gave the speech. He had survived a civil war. He had shattered stereotypes about European players. He had redefined what it meant to be great on both sides of the Atlantic, and finally he was recognized. But the impact goes beyond plaques and speeches. In 2001, Croatian tennis legend Goran Ivanišević shocked the world by winning Wimbledon. At the celebration, he wore Drazen's old number 3 Nets jersey. At the Split airport, Drazen's mother, Biserka, met him in tears. "I was hugging my son's spirit," she said. "I think about him a lot every day," Ivanišević added. "About the national team without him. About the fact that he was the Michael Jordan of Europe. Hundreds of thousands poured into the streets, just like they had after Drazen's death. A new generation carries his torch." Goran Dragic wore number 3 for the Rockets and the Slovenian national team. "He is my idol," he said. "I started playing because of him." Dario Saric, whose father once played alongside Drazen, grew up on VHS tapes and yellowed newspaper clippings. "Every player in my town, we started basketball because of him." Jason Williams once said he always feared Drazen might lose his life back home. A bomb, maybe. Not like this. Not when everything was just beginning. And yet, even in death, Drazen's story didn't end. A Wimbledon champion wore his jersey. An entire generation calls him their hero, and his plaque now hangs in Springfield.